What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the Eclectic Beard. So this go around, we'll be looking at why 70% of Spain is empty. Who knew? Been doing this for a minute. Had to make some adjustments real quick. Anyways, why 70% of Spain is empty. Now, I find that's a high number for a country to be empty, especially one as big as Spain is. And I wonder if it's been like that through history, because they've been on the global stage since, since forever, pretty much, I do believe. So yeah, let's take a look at this video.
With more than 47 million people and an economy of well over 1.2 trillion US dollars, Spain is the world's 14th largest economy and one of the wealthiest and most developed countries in the world. The Spanish economy is only slightly smaller than Russia's, a country with only 3 times as many people and a lot more land. And despite being only a medium-sized country itself, Spain has the second highest length of high-speed rail lines of any country in the world.
Those high speed rail lines, that's something we need here in the U.S. It'd be something you could connect state to state, and even town to town, and have more ways for people to travel other than just a highway. Granted, you'd have to set aside some. It'd be something getting it kind of work out, just being honest. But if they could take and make it work, I think it'd be something to especially with the gas prices. It'd be something that you're not at the mercy of gas prices.
Only lagging behind China. Not the per capita length of high-speed rail, but the overall amount of it, which is insane. It means that despite only being around the same size as just California, Spain has more than 5 times the amount of high-speed rail lines as the entirety of the United States combined has. Thus, it's incredibly easy to travel rapidly between all of Spain's most major population centers clustered around Madrid in the center and the Mediterranean and Atlantic coastlines in the south and the north. But here's the strange part. For Europe, Spain is a big country. It's nearly 4 times the size of England, and yet England is home to 9 million more people than Spain is. The population density of people in England is more than 4.5 times the density of people that's seen in Spain.
And that's not something you would figure, neither. I mean, just because it's on an island. It's a smaller place, but to have 9 million more people, I mean, that's a rather interesting fact right there. I didn't realize that.
And that's largely true across the entirety of Europe. And the big reason why is because there's a lot of empty land in Spain. Between Madrid in the center and the big cities on the coast where all those fancy high-speed rail lines connect to, the land is pretty much empty of people almost everywhere, forming this weird, vacant, donut-shaped population void throughout the entirety of the country's interior. There is, therefore, the populated and developed Spain that we're all aware of and have maybe traveled to, like Barcelona, Madrid, or Valencia, and there's the empty and underdeveloped part of Spain that most of us are woefully unaware of. And the difference in population and area between these two sides of Spain
Jesus Christ, just look at the difference. Look how tightly packed those homes are. I mean, even you've got right over here, you've got all this fucking housing, and then you could see a city center, and it just rises out of the home tops, or the building tops. All of this right here, and then this right here does, but it's all just, God, it's tightly packed. I mean, this looks like Kansas, just a little bit more colorful.
Outside and within the donut void are genuinely enormous and potentially catastrophic for the entire country. 90% of the Spanish population, more than 42 million people, live within just 30% of the country's total land. clustered around the big cities on the coasts and the notable anomalies of Madrid and Zaragoza in the center. And that means that just 10% of the Spanish population, or only about 4.7 million people, live within the remaining 70% of the country's total land area, within and around the empty donut shape. The population density of this so-called empty part of Spain that takes up 70% of the land is only about 18 people per square kilometer on average, which is unparalleled anywhere else in Western Europe. For comparison, that's pretty much the same density of people in Norway on average, which is...
It's crazy because you've got nothing, and then you got houses. It's like some industrial farm type stuff back this way, so a couple more housing, but and that might even be trees. I can't tell, but it's crazy because everything's so tightly packed, even in the small little town. That's crazy.
Is unparalleled anywhere else in Western Europe. For comparison, that's pretty much the same density of people in Norway or the US state of Kansas. But then, there's certain areas within empty Spain that are substantially more empty than others. One of these areas is here, the Saranya-Celtiberica region spanning across many of Spain's internal provinces. This area isn't small. It's roughly the same size as the US state of West Virginia or the Republic of Ireland. And yet, while those territories have populations of 1.8 million and 5 million people respectively, the Saranya-Celtiberica has little more than 503,000 residents. There's only 4 localities throughout this entire region with a population of greater than 20,000 people. And as a result, the average population density throughout it is only about 8 people per square kilometer, about on a par with the US state of New Mexico. This makes the Saranya-Celtiberica the second most sparsely populated region of the entire European Union, with even fewer people per square kilometer than either European Russia or the Scottish Highlands. The only region of the EU that's more sparsely populated and remote is the northernmost region of the Scandinavian peninsula, stretching up into the Arctic Circle, Lapland, where the density is more between 2 and 5 people per square kilometer, which shockingly isn't that much less than this big region in the middle of temperate Spain, which is why some people refer to it as the Spanish Lapland. The area is so remote compared to the rest of Western Europe that for 3 out of 4 of the villages and towns with...
I'm going to say this, I see a lot of hilly landscape, and you've got like little butts of land like this right here, little plateaus. It looks like it'd make it hard to take and build on at the very least. So, I mean, I could see maybe why, but, you know, building being what it is these days, construction, you know, being what it is in modern day, seems like they would expand into some more of it. But it also looks like it could be prime wine or just farming country.
In it takes more than a 45-minute drive just to reach the nearest actual city. A big part of the reason why the specific area is so devoid of people is because of the Iberian System, a medium-altitude mountain range that stretches right through the center of Spain and the Saranya-Celtiberica. Okay. Thus, the steep geography, the high average altitude, and the resulting dispersion of population centers across the limited inhabitable valleys of the area are among several of the natural explanations for the Saranya-Celtiberica's relative underdevelopment. This is further enhanced by the fact that within just a 100-kilometer radius of the Iberian System mountains, you'll find the very large population centers of Madrid, Valencia, Zaragoza, and Bilbao.
So while it may not have a whole lot of people, it's surrounded on all 4 sides, it looks like, by larger population centers. And with the explanation of the mountain range that runs through it, it makes more sense that you've got fewer people. It seems like it's all just straight up valleys. Like I said, looking at it, it looks like there's a bunch of hills and plateaus and stuff. So that would definitely lead to fewer people being able to take and inhabit it, at least for building purposes. I mean, you seen that one little small town that was right there on the last little piece where I said something, just how tightly packed everything gives before it just kind of opens back up to nothingness. That makes complete sense whenever they take in... Okay, I'm starting to see a little bit now.
And these are far from the only mountains that limit the expansion of settlements within the country. There's also the Cantabrian Mountains in the northwest, the Pyrenees along the border with France, the central system that cuts directly across the middle, and the Beadic system that slices across the southeast. Spain is a very mountainous country, and as a result, it has the second highest average elevation of countries within the European Union, only remaining behind Austria, which is largely covered by the Alps. But mountains alone do not explain the whole story. Austria and Switzerland are both far more mountainous than Spain is on average, and yet they both are substantially more densely populated on average. A lot of the further reasons why the Spanish interior is so relatively empty is because of a long history of tragedies and centralized government policies. Over the past 50 years, the rural regions of Spain have lost 28% of their populations, and the story that explains why begins back in the 1930s, with the rise to power of Francisco Franco. The Spanish Civil War was fought between the left-wing Republicans and the right-wing nationalists for 3 years between 1936 and 1939, immediately prior to the Second World War, and the violence was devastating, leaving around 500,000 people dead across the country. Franco emerged victorious and established a fascist-style dictatorship in Spain, closely connected to his Civil War-era allies of Nazi Germany and Fascist Italy.
I almost forgot about the fact that they had a fascist that took a run at there previous to there for years and previous to World War II. That was bloody civil war that did happen. It's amazing until you hear something how much you forget. And I used to be a history buff, that's all I'd take and read about and stuff like that. But it kind of makes sense a little bit, at least from modern days.
Though he kept Spain officially neutral throughout World War II. As a result, his dictatorship survived the war, and Spain continued to effectively function as an authoritarian right-wing police state for decades until his death 30 years later in 1975. And because of that, Francoist-era Spain remained a sort of international pariah state that was relatively isolated for a long time. Spain didn't join the United Nations until 1955, and didn't join the European Economic Community, the precursor of the European Union, until 1986, decades after it was initially formed. Independent political parties and trade.
Imagine what that does to an economy, being that isolated. Holy crap, dude.
Decades after it was initially formed. Independent political parties and trade unions within the country during the dictatorship were banned, and the country initially pursued an economic policy of autarky, aiming to become completely self-reliant. In the aftermath of the wide-scale destruction from the Civil War, Spain's economy remained stagnant for decades. This situation generated a big exodus from Spain of people who came into conflict with the regime, or who were experiencing economic hardships, and as a result, Spain experienced decades of net emigration out of the country during the post-war era. But the real plummeting of the rural countryside began in 1959. After Franco introduced the Plan de Estabilización. These were free market and industrial reforms that completely transformed the previously archaic and stagnant Spanish economy almost overnight. Huge foreign investment came in, and industrial areas around the Basque Country, the northern coast, Barcelona, and Madrid exploded with development, jobs, and opportunities that attracted millions of eager young Spaniards from across the countryside, which gradually fell behind and became neglected. To put the sheer pace of industrialization into context, in 1946, just after World War II, the entire country of Spain had only 72,000 private cars. Just 20 years later, in 1966, there were well over 1 million cars within the country. Spain suddenly became the second fastest growing economy in the entire world during the 1960s, lagging only behind Japan. Following Franco's death and the end of authoritarianism in 1975, many of those large numbers of émigrés returned back to Spain, and mostly settled in the newly industrialized areas of the coasts or Madrid, regardless of wherever they initially had come from.
So you've got stuff like that when foreign investment coming in. It's funny because in China for the longest time, there's a lot of people that lived in the more rural parts, and once they took and started putting money towards industrialization, more money towards industrialization, so they could actually play the game on the global stage economically. They did policy, and they, have mixed in a little bit of capitalism to take and go along. Granted, the state, if you have a business, the state still owns 50% of that business, but corporations started moving in due to some flexible policy changes, and the younger people flocked, and it's still like that today, to the population centers there in China. So you've got an older rural class, and farming there has kind of, while they're still real good at it, it's started to suffer because it's a lot of older people that are doing the farming instead of the younger generation sticking it out, because they're all going to university and stuff like that. But you see stuff like that happen when you've got an economic policy that, gets injections of cash and stuff like that for industrialization reasons. And it looks like, regardless of everything else, the people that previously left and stuff like that due to the regime, 46,000 private cars to over a million. I mean, that's in being the second fastest growing economy behind Japan. I mean, that tells you just the breadth of the overall policy change to take and, bring money to the economy, basically. That's insane, dude. That's crazy. But it's happened many times since they did it, and it's happened before them. But that's great googly moogly.
And over the past 30 years, since the early 1990s, Spain has experienced massive large-scale immigration from abroad for pretty much the first time ever in its history. As of today, more than 15% of the Spanish population were born abroad, the majority of whom were even born outside of Europe, largely from
15% of their population born abroad. That is a ton of people immigrating to that country. That is nuts. But that also shows you it kind of shows you just how, how good of a spot it could be to move to, apparently.
Population were born abroad, the majority of whom were even born outside of Europe, largely from Spain's own former colonies across Latin America. This makes Spain the fourth most immigrated to country in Europe and the 10th most in the world. And again, the vast majority of them have settled within the limited industrialized areas where there is the most opportunity. For these reasons, across the entire 20th century from 1900 to 2000, Spain's population in total roughly doubled, despite 11 of Spain's mostly rural 50 provinces seeing an absolute decline in their overall populations. And in recent times, Spain's population is hardly growing at all. Over the last decade between 2011 and 2021, the population of the country only grew by 0.12%. The lowest decade of growth on record for Spain since record-keeping began between 1833 and 1846. Much of that is due to Spain's incredibly low fertility rate, which many demographers blame on Spain's substantial lack of any serious family support policy. Of all the countries of Western Europe, Spain spends the least amount on family support, limited to only 0.5% of GDP. To put that into perspective, a Spanish family would need to have 57 children just in order to experience the same level of financial support that a family with only 3 children would receive in Luxembourg.
That's insane. But that explains the reason why you've got such a low population growth rate. Like, why have kids there? We can go to another country, they can have kids, and everything be basically taken care of for you. That's something they're gonna have to take and change. There's no two ways about that. Number one, to take and get with the times in Europe, because it seems like most European countries do a lot better job with family support.
These are all of the factors that have contributed to the long hollowing out of the rural part of Spain over decades, like the province of Turuel, a large amount of which is within the aforementioned Serrania Celtiberica. Just look at this chart of Teruel's population over time, which remained fairly static until right here between 1960 and 1970, which was precisely when Franco's industrialization program first took off. Now, Turuel has only half the amount of people that it had a century ago, as tens of thousands emigrated away for better opportunities, leaving behind their tiny villages where the living conditions were often difficult, with cold winters high up in the mountains and only very basic amenities and infrastructure. And that lack of investment into infrastructure here continues. 40% of the small population that remains in Turuel continues to lack any kind of internet broadband coverage, and the province only has a...
Alright, so if you see a bit of a jump cut in here, it's because my family come in, they had took and run to town, they come in and brought me some lunch and stuff like that, so yeah, let's get back to it.
Single ultra-slow train that travels at just 30 kilometers an hour through it, which became a bit of a meme on Spanish social media after this video showed even a tractor overtaking it. And this is all a very far cry from the more developed parts of Spain like Madrid, widely regarded as a major tech hub for the entire European continent, with high-speed rail lines traveling 10 times faster than the slow-moving train through Turuel. The lack of investment and infrastructure in these kinds of rural communities continues to make them less attractive places to live in. And as they become less attractive, less people live there and more move away, and the even less attractive they become for investment. It's all just a pretty vicious cycle, and the Spanish state has seemingly done very little to ever reverse the overall trend over the decades. And thus, this is how we've come to a point now where 90% of Spain's population lives within just 30% of the land, while the remaining scattered few of the 10% live within 70% of the land. And the only way that Spain can fix the problem in the future is inevitably going to be through increasing investments into developing the region to becoming actually attractive to live there once again. Investing intelligently is the simplest key to building a secure future for everyone, from the scale of countries and regions down to the individual. And fortunately for you, you can explore some of your own personal investment decisions with public.com.
Alright, so it looks like the rest of this is going to be, yeah. Alright, so it's interesting that they've got such a big landmass and most of the people don't live but in select parts of it. Now, granted, after watching this video, it's more clear why, between economic policy and stuff like that, the actual land and the way it's, the way it is as well. When you got all those mountain ranges in there, it makes complete sense. But they could take and put more money to developing some of the more rural parts and probably attract even more people to take and immigrate there. I mean, look at Google. A lot of their stuff is out in the middle of freaking nowhere, but they've got towns around it that they can support it with employment and technology. So they could very much do similar stuff like that. But it's just overall a very interesting video. You see Spain. You would think that, number one, it's got more people than the UK in it. That's not the case. And number two, such a big landmass. You figured that you wouldn't have just these little pockets like there is, where most of the population of the country is. So it's very interesting, very informative. I completely enjoyed this video. Go check this channel out. I'll have the link in the video. Check them out, man. This is really good. So, y'all be good to each other. Love yourselves. Peace.